I want to welcome you to Psych 452, Psychology and Business Environments. And this is going to be basically a brief introduction to the class and myself, as well as some broad information about kind of applying psychology to business settings. And that really comes down to the idea of applying psychology or applied psychology. And applied psychology can take many forms. One of them is clinicians. So clinical psychology is applying the science of psychology to the actual help with psychological issues. Community psychology is applying psychological principles to helping communities. Positive psychology, again, aims at how do we actually apply psychology to better everyone's lives. And industrial organizational psychology is focused on applying psychology to industries and organizations. Um, and all of those are fields of applied psychology. So when we're talking about applying psychology to business environments, one of the ways it's often referred to is looking at organizational behavior. And it's not just organizational behavior, but that's one of the main focuses. What can psychology tell us about making the workplace better for the individual, better for groups, and better for the organization at a total? And a lot of what we're going to talk about is kind of both top up and bottom down approaches. Bottom up approaches, so starting from the bottom, is thinking about how can we make each individual's work experience better, their job satisfaction better, their overall opinion of the organization better, to increase motivation and to basically make them happier workers. A top-down approach is what kind of institutes or programs can an organization put in place that affects everyone in the organization? And also, if you increase the individual's behaviors, does that also affect the groups, and does that also affect the overall organization? In other words, does it actually affect the bottom line? In other words, is it more profitable? Because at the end of the day, what we're looking at is applying psychology to business environments, but we're specifically looking at business environments in the Western world for the most part, and specifically the United States, which is very much a capitalistic society. In other words, there are shareholders, there is profit margins. You have to show a return on investment. Now, fortunately, after over 100 plus years of research in the field of industrial organizational psychology, we have generally found enormous support that happier workers, more engaged workers, more motivated workers are also more productive workers. In other words, there is a return on investment. So, of course, we have individually a very strong desire to make the workplace better, simply to make it better. But it also, fortunately, plays into a capitalistic system. It also makes it more profitable. So that's a big picture of how psychology applies to business environments, and obviously we're going to get into that a lot more. I want to briefly introduce myself. My name is Joel T. Nadler. I have a PhD in applied industrial organizational psychology with a specialization in advanced statistics. With that degree, I have done a fair amount of work. I have been an independent consultant. I have started my own consulting agency. I've worked with various other consulting agencies. And when I say consulting agencies, what I'm talking about is applying IO psychology to the workplace for paying organizations. So these have been paid consulting jobs where I've come in to look at selection systems, to look at developmental systems, to look at promotion systems, and to help organizations basically apply a lot of what we're going to be covering in this class. I have also used that PhD in academia. Formerly, I was both an assistant, got tenure, associate, and became a full professor of psychology at a university over in Illinois, where I also directed our industrial organizational master's program. Currently, I am working as a senior consultant for Aon Consulting, which is a Fortune 500 consulting firm. A lot of what we do is actually financial, but I also specifically focus in our pre-hire assessment department. And we have we're a company of about 50,000 people worldwide. So that's just kind of a broad view of my work experience. And of course, now I'm also adjuncting at various universities, including the one that's offering this class. As far as my research interest, generally speaking, broadly, I look at bias in the workplace. That's what I researched when I was an academic. I haven't done as much research in that area since leaving academia. I would say most of my more recent research has been looking at more of psychometrics, which is a fancy word, which basically is the field of measuring individual differences. So psychometrics is how do we measure personality? How do we measure cognitive ability? If you need to get a hold of me, please email me, jnadler@iu.edu. I typically check that daily, and that's the best way to get a hold of me. Or if it's a question you think the entire class might benefit from, definitely make use of the discussion board for open questions. So currently, as I said, I'm working as a senior consultant for Aon, and that is a virtual role. So I actually live out in the country, somewhat near to where you're at the university, but still about 45 minutes away on a horse ranch. Originally, I thought this was going to be a retirement plan, but both my wife and I's work careers became virtual, and we decided to let's go ahead and move to the country and start working with horses. There's a few other pictures here about me, and feel free to either email me individually if you want to get to know me a little bit better. But obviously, let's get into a little bit more about the class itself. So the course structure, I definitely suggest that you really dive into Canvas and explore everything there is to learn about this class in Canvas. Hopefully you've already found the module section. That's where you'll find the assignments for every single week. The syllabus is going to have a lot of information, including instructions on how to do a lot of the assignments, but also each one of those assignments is going to include instructions in Canvas. There will be weekly quizzes. They are not timed. They are open book, open note. So basically, I'm encouraging you to learn. And those quizzes are going to be based on the lectures and the textbook reading. So questions can come from either source. So I definitely suggest that you read the textbook first, then listen to my lectures, and then take the quiz with that textbook and those lectures open and ready to help you take that quiz. All assignments are due on Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time. That's when they will close. So please make sure you are free to take those quizzes, those discussions, or turn in those papers early. Most of them will become live on the Monday morning before they're due, so you'll have a full week where you'll have access to them. Feel free to do them whenever it makes sense for your schedule. As I said, there is a textbook. It should be available electronically. You can also get versions of it if you prefer a hardback or a physical copy. Also, you can probably find previous versions of the book cheaper, and those, like I said, the previous edition is substantially not much different than the current version. Just make sure that the chapters haven't changed. So look at the chapter listing in the most recent version, and you can find that online, and make sure that you're reading the right chapters if you have an earlier version. As far as the discussions themselves, there will be discussions about every third week. I think there's a total of 5 of them across 15 weeks. Discussion sessions are a little bit more structured than other classes, perhaps. Each one of my discussions will be an active question that will require a paragraph or two to fully answer, and may require you even to cite my lectures or the textbooks to define things. Please do so. Once you've posted that initial answer to the discussion fully, you'll be expected to respond to at least 2 other students' discussions initial posts. When you're following up, those should also be fairly detailed, about a paragraph, and should stand alone. In other words, if I am reading your follow-up post, the first thing you should do is, in your own words, tell me what you're commenting on. What is the point or example that you want to talk about? Then discuss it. How does it apply to your own learning? How does it apply to your own understanding? Or perhaps, why do you not necessarily completely agree with it? I have no problem with disagreement. Just make sure it stays civil. As I said, Canvas is going to be key for this class. It is an asynchronous class, and it is virtual. I will be posting in the announcements weekly to remind people what is due, and I hope that everyone stays up to date with those due date assignments. The final part of this class will be 4 project papers interspersed amongst the discussions, so you should not have a discussion and a project paper due the same week. Project papers are usually going to be 2 to 3 pages, and each one will have a full description of exactly what you need to do, including even a paragraph count. For those students that may be better writers, the paragraph count is to be an aid. If you find that you're able to write in a different style than is suggested, with either more or less paragraphs, and you believe you're fully addressing the questions in the project paper, that's fine as well. The paragraphs are there as a structural guide, not necessarily as a requirement. If you have any additional questions in the course structure, feel free to reach out to me via email or the TA for this class, whose information will also be on the syllabus. So, what is an organization? If we're talking about psychology and business environments, we're basically talking about organizations. And as I said, a lot of universities would refer to a class similar to this as an organizational behavior class, and that's kind of how I'm treating this. If you take a look at the textbook, it is managing behavior in organizations. So, a general definition is a structured social system consisting of a group or individuals working together to meet upon agreed upon objectives. So there's a lot of things that can be an organization. A lot of social clubs are organizations, universities are organizations, or businesses are organizations, political groups are organizations. As long as there's some form of structure to the social system, generally that structure can take many, many forms, but it does mean that people at least have some idea of what their role within that organization is. There needs to be multiple people. They may be all individuals or they may be individuals in groups. However, those individuals or groups are working towards a common agreed upon objective, whether that objective is graduating people with bachelor's degrees, whether that objective is making sales figures at a Walmart, or whether that objective is keeping the United States of America safe from foreign threats, both foreign and domestic. Those are all goals and those are all objectives. So throughout this class, I want you to keep in mind what we're talking about when we're talking about business environments. We're talking about organizations. And organizations can be thought of kind of, again, and that kind of bottom-up viewpoint. Bottom up, an organization starts with a bunch of individuals. What makes it an organization is that structure, which then leads to specific objectives. Or we could look at it top down. We could look at the structure and the objectives, and then how individuals work towards those structures and objectives. So when we're thinking about organizations and we're talking about applying psychology, we're looking at basically what's called 3 levels of analysis. And basically analysis in this case is where can we look to actually make changes or to make things better? And there's the individual processes. Units of analysis is the individual. Work-related attitudes, measurement. So if we were doing pre-hire selection and we were measuring people's personality and trying to measure that and match that personality with a profile of people that do well in that job, that would be an individual process. We'd be at the individual level of analysis. If I'm looking at an intervention that is focusing on individual development, again, I'm at that individual level of analysis. The next level up is the group process unit of analysis. So in that case, we're looking at the group as itself. Topics such as teamwork would be at this level. So anytime we're talking about how do we make a group work better, we're no longer looking at the individuals. We're looking at the group as a unit, as an actual concept that we can impact, we can have control over, we can make better. So how do we improve groups? And then finally, there's the organizational processes. The unit of analysis is the organization itself. So organizational design, top level C-suite executive kind of decision making, those things would be at the organizational level. Now you can see that a lot of things that we might want to look at psychologically within a business might affect all 3 of these. If I was looking at coaching on executive level decision making, that's going to affect the entire organization, but it's also going to be focused at the individual level, each one of those executives. If the executives are part of a leadership team, I might also be thinking about group processes. So though we often want to ask what is the main level of analysis we're discussing, a lot of times interventions may be affecting all 3 of these. If they're affecting truly just individual processes, that's what I would consider a bottom-up approach. We're trying to change or make individuals more effective, more engaged, more satisfied with their job, assuming that will then have impacts on the group and the organization. If I'm changing the organization structure, how it's structured and what the roles are, that would be an organizational top-down process with, again, the intent that by changing these roles, it will have a positive effect on the group and individual processes. So this is just kind of an overall model for us to keep in mind as we discuss more things within this class. So let's continue talking about those levels of analysis in organizational behavior or psychology and business environments. So again, if we're looking at a university, the student would be the individual level. So if I'm coming up with assignments, quizzes, creating this class, each one of those is aimed at the individual. How do I actually help you as a student learn this material? However, the classes itself is a group. So everyone that's in Psych 452 is a part of the group experience. So I also want to think about overall, How do I make sure the class is at the right level, that the assignments are not either too hard or too easy, and that the general class itself is going to function well. Now, if this was an in-person class or a more group-based class, that might also be a further part of it, that there may be activities that are affecting the entire class. As this is an asynchronous virtual class, we're mainly going to be focused, at least I am, at the student level. But it's still worth noting that the class itself would consist itself of a group. And of course, if we move forward one more, IU is the actual organization that this class is a part of, the bigger part. So the organizational level in Indiana University is interested in making sure that students are successful. They're interested in making sure that every class has a large percentage of students that are doing well. And of course, at the end of the day, they're also interested in overall success rate of their students, in other words, graduation rates. And how does this class impact that? And within that class, how do the students make up that impact? And that's just an example of levels of analysis with something that we're very familiar with at this point, the university itself. So let's talk a little bit about the field of organizational behavior or applying psychology to organizations and businesses. Again, it applies scientific method to managerial problems. In other words, one of the main things that we bring to the table as psychologists is thinking about what we've learned about human behavior and human decision making and how can we apply that to managerial decisions. Using past research, develop hypotheses, and then use sound experimental techniques to address our questions. Now, a lot of times in business settings, this is not necessarily going to be a formal study, but it does mean kind of creating models that allow managers to gather data, examine the data, and try to make decisions based on the data. We study individuals, groups, and organizations, and we've already talked a lot about that levels of analysis. It is definitely multidisciplinary in nature. So you often hear the term multidisciplinary. But what this really means is I actually was drawn to the field of industrial organizational psychology because I found psychology in general interesting, but I really wasn't interested enough in one particular field, for example, cognitive psychology, social psychology, clinical psychology, to devote all of my study to that one field. I really found it all interesting. And in IO, industrial organizational psychology, I found they stole from everyone. And I mean that in a very good way. When you start looking at the theories that we're going to talk about, you're going to see drawing from social psychology, drawing from clinical psychology, drawing from cognitive psychology, drawing from neuropsychology. If it helps us decide how we can help businesses, we're going to use it. And that's what I mean by multidisciplinary in nature. Industrial organizational psychology is if it's sound science and there's sound research behind it and we can apply it in a way that helps organizations, then that's all good. And at the end of the day, really the goal is to enhance organizational effectiveness through and individual well-being. So one of the best ways to enhance an organization's effectiveness, its bottom line, its retention, its value, how much money it's making, how much of a profit it turns for its stockholders, is by increasing the individual well-being, the engagement, the satisfaction, and the motivation of those individuals that work within that organization. So just some practical managerial problems that this field of psychology can help. How goals can enhance job performance. So there's been an enormous amount of research into goals, goal setting, and how goal setting can impact motivation. Well, that also directly applies to job performance. Well, there's also been a lot of research that's been done that we're going to go over on how jobs can be designed to enhance employee satisfaction. So what is it about the job itself that can be either more or less engaging? And probably all of us have had jobs that by their very nature are either very satisfying, very enjoyable, or not. I know I've had some jobs, and even in the same field, that have differed greatly. Now, sometimes this can also be dependent on who your manager is, who the customers are, but the job design itself can have an impact as well. So we're also going to discuss when individuals and groups make better decisions. So how can we empower people that are not necessarily specifically psychologists to use the knowledge that we've gained through psychological research to make better decisions? And how can we make groups function better? Generally, the research does show that a well-integrated group usually outperforms the individual, but there are certain steps that have to be done to make sure that group is integrated. We're going to talk about how organizational communication can be improved, and you're going to hear this over and over again in this class, that one of the keys to successful organizations is formalizing communications, making sure that communications are clear, easily understood, and that decisions are being communicated in a way that may not always make someone happy, but at least they understand the system. We're also going to talk about work-related stress and how that can be alleviated, and also how leaders can enhance team effectiveness. So all of those are practical problems that almost every organization faces that psychology has answers for, and suggestions for. And again, just ending on this particular slide with multidisciplinary roots, obviously we're primarily drawing from psychology, and I already talked about the various fields of psychology and how we apply that to business settings. But that also doesn't mean that we stop at psychology. Sociology has an enormous amount of research, especially at the organizational and group level. Anthropology can tell us a lot about kind of evolutionary um, decision making and how humans behave. Political science, of course, applies greatly, especially if we're looking at political organizations. And of course, economics and business, managerial science. All of these are areas to also look at. And I often tell people that are specifically coming out of the field of industrial organizational psychology that one of their goals is that once they actually leave the happiness of academia and go into the real world, they're going to be working with people that come from business schools, that have MBAs, that have bachelors in managerial science, bachelors in business. And you need to talk that language as well, because you need to be able to communicate what psychology is bringing to the workplace and how it can make the workplace better. So hopefully you've enjoyed this broad introduction to the field. We'll obviously be digging down as we get into additional modules, and I look forward to talking to you more in this virtual format. And again, if you have any questions about any of these lectures, feel free to reach out either through the discussion board or email me directly. Thank you.